Hello everyone, welcome back to another video where today I want to take a bit of a look at Radio Times' coverage for Doctor Who Season 2, but more specifically, their recent previews for the latest series, where Russell T Davies has been giving descriptions for each episode to come, obviously some being more vague than others. And we get some really interesting new tidbits in this article that I want to discuss and are really interesting, including, most excitingly, an insight into what the finale could be offering, because we still don't really know. All that and more coming right up. Subscribe if you're new, that would be greatly appreciated. We cover regular Doctor Who content here on the channel, and any support would be greatly appreciated. But with that said, let's get right into it. So as I said, I'm taking this from the latest Radio Times issue, and I'm going to be basically going over all of the episode synopsises that they put in this issue, because there's some really interesting stuff about each episode. Starting off with the Robot Revolution, this one is the most extensive kind of synopsis of the bunch. It's also the one that I think is going to be least surprising if you've been watching my videos recently, because we've spoken a lot about the previews for Robot Revolution. We did that yesterday. We talked about the early reviews for Robot Revolution, so go check that out if you haven't. But here is the synopsis he gives. The Robot Revolution, written by Russell T Davies, directed by Peter Hall. On her 16th birthday, Belinda's boyfriend arranged for a star to be named after her. But 17 years later, the robots from that star have come to find their queen and take her home. That's just the start for Belinda, as she's taken to the planet Miss Belinda Chandra 1 to meet the citizens, the Miss Belinda Chandra kind, and their robots, the Miss Belinda Chandra robots. Yes, you're right, it's a mad old world, but things soon turn serious. People are dying, rebels are fighting back, and a terrifying wedding is being arranged. Belinda's trapped in the middle of hulking robots, an evil AI generator, rocket ships, laser battles, a funny little friend called Scoot, and the court historian, a man who speaks in a very strange pattern that might hold a clue to her escape. And the Doctor's got problems of his own. If he can save Belinda from this madhouse, their journey together is only just beginning, because something in the universe is going very, very wrong. So yeah, I think we basically know the general vibe of this episode, right? Belinda is gifted a star as a teenager by her boyfriend via one of those schemes where you can get like a star named after you. Years later, these robots believe that she is their rightful queen as a result of the star being named after her. They take her to go and be married to their king, some sort of AI generator type person. She runs into the Doctor, chaos ensues. The Doctor tries to get her home and fails due to something going wrong in the universe. I feel like we have a basic gist of this one. Also, shout out to this cool picture that they have in Radio Times of the Doctor and Belinda on the different levels of the TARDIS. I think that's a really nice image. Episode 2, Lux, written by Russell T Davies, directed by Amanda Brocchi. The Doctor tries to return Belinda to the day she left the Earth, but a mysterious force keeps making the TARDIS bounce off course, and one of those bounces takes them to Miami at 4 in the morning in 1952. Things are different at night, says the Doctor, aware of the danger from the moment they arrive. In the Palazzo Picture House, an old cartoon, Mr. Ring-a-Ding Goes to Town is playing, but as hapless projectionist Reginald Pye, Linus Roach, looks on in horror, Mr. Ring-a-Ding somehow steps out of the screen. Accompanied by the sound of screams, it's a long night of terror on the Florida coast. How do you fight a living cartoon? But the danger goes beyond that, as the Doctor and Belinda find all they hold dear being challenged. Our glorious guest star Alan Cumming takes centre stage here as the voice of Mr. Ring-a-Ding. Smile, sing and suffer. That's his catchphrase. I really like that as a catchphrase. Smile, sing and suffer. That's really nice. I really like that. Very catchy. I'm very excited for this episode. Of the bunch, the episodes I'm probably most excited for are episodes 2, 3, maybe 5, and the finale. And the fact that there's that many that I'm excited for is definitely a good sign. But Lux is definitely the one I'm probably most looking forward to, at least on a visual level. I just think it looks fantastic, so I'm just very much looking forward to seeing all of the set pieces in this one for sure. But episode 3 is where things get interesting. This is of course written by Russell T Davies and Sharma Angel Wolfel and directed by Amanda Brocchi again. 500,000 years in the future, an empty planet, a colony base, which lost contact 15 days ago. And that's it. That's all I'm saying. Sometimes there's so much PR and publicity, these episodes wear thin. And that's my fault too. I love blabbing about them. But sometimes it's good to keep an episode quiet, so you can come to it unprepared, and believe you me, nothing could prepare you for the terror that's about to be unleashed on the worst day of the Doctor's life. This episode is tough, it's weird, it's relentless, and both Sharma and I can promise you, it is merciless. Welcome to Planet 6767, prey to leave. So this seems to be our essentially wildly yonder of the season, the one that they are keeping the most just completely silent on, which makes me incredibly curious. I mean, just the initial premise alone is the most like Doctor Who premise ever. They're 500,000 years in the future. There's an empty planet and a colony base which lost contact 15 days ago. That is like textbook Doctor Who premise. And obviously, from everything we've heard, this is the scariest one of the series. So I'm really looking forward to that as someone who likes a bit of darkness in their Doctor Who. As I've said, Wildly Yonder is probably my favourite of like the RTD2 run so far, and this very much feels like Shooty's own kind of episode equivalent to that. So if it's anywhere near as good as Wildly Yonder was, I will be very happy with the WoW. Episode 4, Lucky Day, is written by Pete McTeague and directed by Peter Hall once again. Back on Earth, Ruby Sunday, Millie Gibson, is recovering from life with the Doctor and finds a new boyfriend, but when Conrad, Jonah Hua King, tries to live up to Ruby's ideals to become as brave as the Doctor, a world of danger opens up. For a long time, this episode was called Meanwhile, because we've all wondered what happens when the Doctor's companions get back to Earth, once the adventure stops. We've seen the wonderful Sarah Jane Smith investigate alien goings-on from her attic, and lots of old companions are now being conscripted into UNIT, because they've got so much experience beyond this world. But Ruby is still so young, barely 20, still exploring her family, and still working out what she wants to do in life. So it was a great delight to hand this episode over to Pete McTeague, such a great writer of the human heart, for him to explore what happens once the Doctor is gone. All that plus monsters, UNIT, Kate, Shirley, gunk, helicopters, a creepy English village, and a glimpse of a Doctor and Ruby story too. I think the thing that interests me the most here is the idea that Ruby's boyfriend, Conrad, played by Jonah Hua King, is attempting to live up to Ruby's image of the Doctor. Because I suppose, in a sense, how could anyone you meet after the Doctor ever live up to the idea of the Doctor you have in your head? You know, the Doctor is such a amazing, like, sort of person that, like, how could anyone ever live up to that? And so the idea of, like, Ruby having a boyfriend who almost feels pressured into kind of fulfilling that same role is incredibly interesting to me, and I think it's a really interesting idea. It reminds me very much of what happened to Clara, where she tried too much to be like the Doctor, and it ended up ultimately costing her life. However, this is different in the sense that it's someone trying to impress a former companion of the Doctor and trying to live up to what they've seen previously. I also find it really funny that whenever we get a Ruby solo episode, they seem to revolve around creepy old villages. Last year it was a Welsh village. This year we've got an English village. So nice to see that we're keeping that tradition going. But yeah, very, very interested in this one. I think the idea for the story being called Meanwhile would have been fun, although I ultimately do understand why they didn't go for that. It might have made it sound like too fillery, maybe. I also find it interesting that he uses the word conscripted for the companions of the Doctor joining UNIT. One thing that I do sort of feel is that I don't feel that every companion of the Doctor would join UNIT willingly. There's some that certainly would, but there are others who would be very anti kind of their more militaristic way of doing things. For example, you know, Sarah Jane famously said, "Oh, I don't like you lot, too many guns," that kind of thing. And so I wonder if they're less so volunteers and more so kind of not forced into it, but they're kind of like pressured into it via maybe like financial means or something like that. I really want to see a darker side to this UNIT team, because up to now it's been very, very, look how great UNIT is. They're the Doctor's best mates on Earth. But if we're getting a spin-off dedicated to UNIT and dedicated to how they deal with things when the Doctor's not there, I want to see them struggle with actual decisions that they have to make when the Doctor is absent. Kind of similar to what we see in things like Children of Earth, where obviously you get that great opening line from Gwen where she says, "I think sometimes the Doctor looks away in shame." I think something like that would be really interesting to explore with a UNIT team that seems to have all the power in the world. You know, they're much more powerful than we've ever seen them before. You know, they've got a big tower in the middle of central London. They've got all this technology. But what happens when that technology gets taken too far or is used for the wrong purposes? I think that would be a really interesting thing to explore. Whether that is what they explore, I don't know, but it's an interesting concept, I think. Episode 5, The Story in the Engine, written by Inua Ellams, directed by Macalla McPherson. "I'm not human," says the Doctor. "I'm an evolved life form. My body changes a lot. And sometimes this ancient Time Lord needs to rest, to find friends, to relax, to forget and to simply enjoy the telling of tales. One such sanctuary is Omo's palace. But when the TARDIS arrives, Ovo seems to have a new master. Men have gone missing, something vast and hungry is demanding to be fed, and the Doctor discovers a universe he has never even guessed at before. A while back, I went to the National Theatre to see Barbershop Chronicles by Inua Ellams. I left thinking, that man should write Doctor Who. I then discovered that Inua had been working on stories with my predecessor Chris Chibnall, and if that's not enough, Sheety came to me with a suggestion. Have you ever thought of using the writer called Inua Ellams? It was meant to be, and I'm so proud to have helped this to screen, as Inua unveils a new world of riches, replete with gods, monsters, revenge, passion, and a very big spider indeed. I'm very excited for this one, because obviously it's a very fresh writer, someone who's never worked on the show before, but more than that, I think its concept is so unique for Doctor Who. The idea of, delving into African mythology and gods is a really cool way of taking the god concept, and I get the feeling that it's going to be the one that feels the most different. Kind of like what 73 Yards felt like last year. That's like our big experimental one, a big one that feels like the most different, the most out there for Doctor Who. Obviously, people are suggesting that the villain is Anansi. I never say the name of him right. The god who basically controls stories in African mythology, and that's what the spider is, which if that's the case, very, very cool, and the web is reflective of the stories of the different people. And if that is the case, I think that'll be very, very cool. Episode 6, the Interstellar Song Contest, written by Juno Dawson, directed by Ben A. Williams. This is the one. Rylan, songs, lizards, Dow's points. You probably think you've got the measure of this episode. That's what the Doctor and Belinda think, as the TARDIS bounces them to Harmony Arena, deep in outer space, for the 803rd annual contest. But this is written by Juno Dawson, the best-selling fantasy novelist, and I'm telling you with absolute confidence, you're not ready for the shocks and surprises in store. This year, episodes will land on BBC iPlayer at 8 AM on Saturdays, so I'd recommend staying offline all day if you want the raw experience of this one on a Saturday night, because this story takes much bigger swings than any you were expecting. It's darker, wilder, and tougher than the title would suggest, and the world of Doctor Who will never be the same again. So I was really interested reading this, because I assumed the Interstellar Song Contest would be a bit of a light and fluffy one before we go into the finale. Kind of similar to what Rogue was last year, kind of more light, quirky adventure before, the final episode that's a lot more, I guess, serious. But actually, this one also seems to indicate that it has some subtle darknesses that perhaps aren't necessarily implied by the very kind of light and chirpy nature of the title and the general premise. Part of me wonders if it's going to be a similar scenario to what we saw in things like Bad Wolf Parting of the Ways, where in that episode, of course, the whole premise was, okay, it's a game station with all the different TV shows on it that the humans then watch, but of course, there's a lot more to it than that, and how they deal with these TV shows can be really quite dark, and obviously the people who are controlling that, or I guess the villains who are controlling that, are very dark as well. So if they're doing something like that with it, I think that could be very interesting, especially because I kind of assumed that this would be, a fun romp, but it does seem to have more to it than that, which I'm glad about, I think. Episode 7, Wishworld, written by Russell T Davies, directed by, once again, Alex Sanjeev Pillai. Everyone get ready to rejoice, because the great day is coming, the most important date in history. The clock is ticking and everyone is preparing for a joyous tomorrow, when the whole world will change forever. Here we go, it's season finale time, with a great big 2-part story blasting the roof off of anything we've made before. Welcome to a strange new world in which the old saying, there's many a slip, twixt, cup and lip, is gaining a terrifying new power. But what are the bone beasts? Why is Mrs. Flood, Anita Dobson, hiding in the sky? What secrets do the dispossessed keep? And why is a mysterious message echoing across time and space saying, tables don't do that? I have no idea what this episode is. I genuinely don't. This whole kind of thing is incredibly vague. What does that quote mean? There's many slip twixt cup and lip. Okay, so I've just done a quick Google search, and according to Wikipedia, there's many a slip twixt the cup and lip is an English proverb. It implies that even when a good outcome or conclusion seems certain, things can still go wrong. Similar in meaning to don't count your chickens before they hatch. Huh. Interesting. Also, they mentioned Mrs. Flood hiding in the sky, which is very interesting. I don't know what that means. Obviously, we get a mention of bone beasts, who I assume are the things we've seen in the trailers. And obviously, you've got that message echoing through time and space, very similar to the old question, Doctor Who, in things like Time of the Doctor. But the phrase tables don't do that could really mean anything. Episode 8, The Reality War, once again written by Russell T Davies and directed by Alex Sanjeev Pillai. The devastating climax, strands that have drawn together across seasons and centuries now pull together, tight as a noose. As legends converge for battle, our brave, battered, beaten Doctor stands alone and helpless against the Unholy Trinity. Surely this is the end. Unless... So this is the big one that's got people talking. Who are the Unholy Trinity? Obviously, we know that they're who the Doctor is fighting in the finale, but who are the Unholy Trinity? Well, I did a quick Google. The Unholy Trinity often refers to a concept found in religion, which is basically the opposite of the Christian Holy Trinity, i.e. the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, but with figures obviously being evil or deceptive, such as Satan, the Antichrist, and a false prophet. So, this could mean a number of things. One, they're playing it straight, and we literally have basically the devil coming back. Maybe the same devil we had in Series 2, the same version of Satan we had in Series 2. A false prophet could perhaps imply Mrs. Flood, because Mrs. Flood herself is giving all these prophecies and predictions and stuff like that, and maybe she is heralding the coming of the Unholy Trinity. And then the Antichrist, I have no idea what that could be in this context. Perhaps Conrad's attempt to become the Doctor leads to him kind of becoming the antithesis to the Doctor, therefore the Antichrist. If in this metaphor the Doctor is Christ, then I guess Conrad, who is trying to become the Doctor but fails, represents the Antichrist, perhaps. Okay, so in editing, I did a bit more research into the Unholy Trinity in Christianity, and I'm going to read you some of the things that I read that could give us more evidence to back up the claims that I'm making here. So first, let's look at Satan, the anti-god. Satan, referred to as the dragon in Revelation 12:3, is the mastermind behind the Unholy Trinity, described as a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his heads. This imagery symbolises his vast influence on authority over the earth. The 7 heads represent historical kingdoms through which Satan wielded power. And then it goes on to talk a bit about him. I did think when it said 7 crowns, that kind of reminded me of Omega's head being kind of crownish, but admittedly it might be a bit of a stretch there. Next up we have the Antichrist, the beast from the sea. The Antichrist, known as the beast from the sea in Revelation 13, is the second entity in the Unholy Trinity. He masquerades as a counterfeit Christ, a false messiah deceiving the world with his supposed wisdom, strength, and charm. The term beast from the sea suggests the Antichrist emerges from nations of the world, as the sea often symbolises the chaotic, tumultuous nations or peoples in biblical writings. So a couple of interesting things here. This backs up what I was saying about Conrad being kind of a false kind of doctor. You know, basically, if in our metaphor the Doctor is a kind of Christ-like figure, then Conrad represents the antithesis to that. And in fact, there is posters saying Conrad needs you and stuff, so clearly implying Conrad does take some form of leadership role over people to a certain degree. Maybe people do herald him as kind of a new hero, maybe even taking the place of the Doctor in some kind of way, which would very much back up what was said here. I mean, it's important to point out that Russell has always had a fascination with religion. I mean, obviously you can go back to things like the Second Coming, all the way back when, and obviously in his first era, it's very much kind of implied that the Doctor is kind of treated almost, you know, kind of as the lonely god. That's his whole thing. So it would make complete sense for me for them to do a Doctor Who adaptation of this. The other thing I find interesting is that the Antichrist is referred to as the beast from the sea. The reason I find this interesting is because the very next spin-off we have is called The War Between the Land and the Sea. So maybe the Antichrist, let's say Conrad's actions, leads to something happening to the sea, which leads into a war between the land and the sea. I realise I'm saying a lot of words very quickly, but I hope I'm making sense. And then finally we have the false prophet, the beast from the earth. The false prophet, referred to as the beast from the earth in Revelation 13:11, is the third member of the Unholy Trinity. His role is to serve as a counterfeit to the Holy Spirit by promoting the worship of the Antichrist and misleading people to follow this false messiah. Now this is interesting because up until this point we've only ever seen Mrs. Flood on Earth, and I do remember her saying in Legendary Sunday Empire Death, whatever gods you pray to, his kingdom is falling and stuff like that.
Do you believe in the power of prayer?
I most certainly do.
Then tell your maker I will come to storm down his gates of gold and seize his kingdom in my true name.
So this would very much make sense. She believes in the Antichrist as the prophet, as opposed to, any other god, basically. And it would also explain why she was aware of Sutekh, but not necessarily in awe of him, because that's not who she worships. The other thing I want to mention, that I didn't mention in the original recording, is obviously there's been rumours about, like, the Rani and stuff as well, so maybe the Unholy Trinity is, like, the Rani, Omega, and someone else, and maybe the Rani is the one that we're supposed to believe is the person behind it, when in reality Omega is the one doing all this stuff. Honestly, it could go so many different ways at this point, but it's very fascinating. Another suggestion is, of course, that this is a more Time Lord-centric thing, and the Unholy Trinity represents Rassilon, Omega, and the Other, which, if you don't know what that is, essentially, in the old Virgin New Adventures, Rassilon, Omega, and the Other were the three founders of Time Lord Society. Rassilon was the one who pioneered regeneration, Omega was the one who pioneered time travel, and the Other is the being that, in the Virgin New Adventures at least, was reincarnated into the Doctor. So people are wondering, is that who the villains are for this story? Of course, there have been rumours about Omega before this point, so it's possible. I still don't know whether they actually have the rights to use Omega or not, and I don't really know where it would fit into the rest of the story going with the whole reality bending concept. I suppose you could say that, like, reality being bended causes the Time Lords to come back with a vengeance. In this version of reality, Gallifrey still exists, and therefore allows the Time Lords, allows this Unholy Trinity to come back into the picture. Another group I saw suggested were the gods of Ragnarok, each of them representing one member of the Unholy Trinity. Some other people have also suggested that they could be the threefold deity suggested in Legend of Ruby Sunday: Malice, Mischief, and Misery. But honestly, I don't know who the Unholy Trinity are. Leave your theories in the comments below, because I'd be fascinated to know what you guys think. Whatever you think, though, about any of these synopsises, let me know down in the comments below. If you did enjoy this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.